much. It's a great honour to be giving one of these lunchtime colloquia in the Rachel Carson Center, and it's a real thrill to be on the board and to be connected with this amazing centre. I should say first off that this is a somewhat unusual paper for me. I gave Christoph some alternatives, some that were kind of closer to my kind of mainstream work, but no, it was to be Roadkill. So here it is. And it's unusual for me to begin with because it's co-authored. So, you know, as a humanities scholar, I don't often co-author things. And I've co-authored this with my colleague at Bath Spa University, fellow professor of environmental humanities, Owen Jones. And I want to say thank you to Owen, first up, for getting me involved in this project and for giving me permission to give the paper, sadly, in his absence here today. So the paper really brings together our perspectives and experiences of roadkill from the UK and Australia. But it also brings together our different disciplinary strengths. Owen's in human geography and animal geographies, and mine, as you've heard, in eco-criticism, eco-philosophy, and also environmental history to some degree. And I'm also grateful to the organisers of a series of special sessions at the Royal Geographical Society conference in London this year on the question of for whom and what do we mourn, because this is where Owen and I gave the paper its first airing, and in fact I've incorporated some extra elements in this presentation on the basis of the really helpful discussion that we had when we gave the paper at that point. So it's in part an auto-topological paper in that we seek to offer mostly personal explorations of roadkill and its geographies. It's prompted first and foremost by repeated encounters with road-killed animals on the roads around where we've lived. It might also be described as a multi-species autoethnography. I'm afraid that this is the first of many animal corpses that will feature in this presentation. One of the questions that was raised at the RGS was whether we ought to show these images. And in fact, we've agonised over it because it's disrespectful of the dead, is it not? We wouldn't show photos of human road fatalities. So does this disregarding of the dignity and death of road-killed animals not implicitly reinforce the human exceptionalism that we're seeking to critique? Well, with some qualms, we've decided to keep the images in the hope that in the context of the paper, you'll come to see them in a new light. The point is that they're generally somehow not seen, so we want to make them visible. We want to render this carnage visible for you. But also in an acknowledgement of the sheer difficulty of moving beyond human exceptionalism. This is a journey that we're on, not a destination we've arrived at. So the utopian horizon of the paper is a time which is not yet, when it will be considered offensive to show the images of the dead others that we are going to show now. Bodies of dead others litter our everyday life of commute and travel. The corpses of dead animals are often left in view, sometimes repeatedly run over until they are no more than stains on the tarmac. The seemingly unremarkable and mostly unremarked upon and routine sight of animal corpses on modern roadways we find in the first instance upsetting. Beyond that, we seek to open up a whole range of narratives that speak of the huge gulf in political and ethical status between animals and modern humans, and the way the modern human world constructs space which is deeply hostile to the flourishing becomings of non-humans and possibly also humans, if truth be told. We see roadkill as a violent and asymmetrical intersection of human and non-human everyday motilities. The paper is in part simply a lament, not only for the dead animals encountered, but also for the wider era of ecocide unfolding around us. What is the salience of roadkill, we ask, in an era of escalating extinctions? We also explore the question what one should do on encountering the corpse of another, and in some instances, the young of a deceased parent. And we consider strategies for rendering other than human road fatalities both more meaningful and less common. As US environmental historian Gary Kroll remarks in a 2015 paper on this subject, road-killed animals are simultaneously one of the most common ways that Americans encounter wildlife and one of the most unexamined phenomena by scholars. Roadkill arises from the collision of two forms of mobility, human and non-human animal, and as Kroll observes, both are situated within contingent natural cultural histories. From this perspective, roadkill represents a collision of cultural history and natural history, and an examination of that entanglement is vital to understanding the relationships between humans and animals in the modern world. And I'd add that the escalation of the statistics of road-killed animals from the 1960s suggests that this should be added to all those other hockey stick graphs evidencing the great acceleration of the Anthropocene. Well, the question of human exceptionalism in the matter of roadkill was brought home to me when I came across this roo carcass juxtaposed with a cross on a busy road in Canberra in 2008. Now, as Libby will recall, I was in Canberra at the time as a fellow of the National Museum of Australia, conducting research on the environmental history of the Canberra area. And I'd become fascinated by the ways in which the planners of Australia's federal capital, which is actually my old hometown, had succeeded, at least in part, in realising Walter Burley Griffin's vision of a city that was not only in but of the landscape. So the ecotopian design of Canberra literally brings the bush into town, which is great for affording city slickers the opportunity to connect with the countryside. But it also places free-living animals at risk on the roads that cut through their territory, with kangaroos being the most commonly encountered casualties. What struck me about this one, though, was its proximity to a cross memorialising another kind of road fatality, evidently a human one. While perhaps not exclusively human, the practice of honouring the dead is an anthropic constant, with mortuary sites constituting one of the most important markers of early human presence for archaeology. Overseeing the passage of the deceased into whatever afterlife they were believed to be entering has been a crucial task for religion throughout human history. Well, among those who today erect crosses to mark the site where loved ones have been involved in fatal traffic accidents, many might no longer subscribe to a specifically Christian view of the afterlife. But in deploying this culturally resonant symbol, they are effectively turning their private loss into a public memorial. Yet, as Judith Butler has argued, who and what we do not mourn tells us as much about ourselves as who and what we do mourn. Juxtaposed with the disregarded, mouldering roo carcass, then, this cross offers every passer-by a potent lesson in human exceptionalism, proclaiming that while the death of any human being, even a complete stranger, should concern us all as fellow humans, the accidental killing of a fellow living being categorised as animal is or should be a matter of complete indifference. Where I've got OJ on the slide, this means that this is Owen's section. So I'm ventriloquising Owen here. Motorised road vehicles are extraordinarily violent things when in use. Stand by any road with fast-moving traffic. The noise, the pulse of air, the swirling eddies in their wake, a testament to the violent forces in play. Traffic is so commonplace that this fact has become just background noise to everyday modern life. Motor vehicles are hostile to all bodies not inside them, and often also to the ones that are inside them, as we know. Roads expose the fact that modern human life has produced chronically striated space in ways that are hostile to and destructive of non-humans and nature more generally. Roads cut up the territories and the rootways of animal becoming and the becoming of earth in more vertical exchanges, so between soil, which is itself of course a multi-species collective, the things that live on the surface of the ground and the atmosphere above. This is what we mean by vertical exchanges. These are all plastered over with our tarmacked roads. But before there were cars, there were trains. The conflict between modern terrestrial transport systems and animal becoming was anticipated by Turner in his famous painting Rain, Steam and Speed. Well, now, while technophiliac viewers might take pleasure in the phallic upsurge of the train bearing down upon them, few commentators have focused in on the hair, barely visible in the misting rain, which is about to get flattened as it attempts to flee. A non-human member of the multi-species collective that had long co-constituted the pre-industrial countryside of Britain. The human participants of this collective are also recalled by Turner very discreetly in a ghostly group of rural workers, similarly veiled by mist, as if on the verge of disappearing. While they wave jauntily, the imminent, if forever suspended, death of the hare becomes presciently metonymic of the erasure of a whole way of life. But might roads and cars not also be one of the harbingers of ecocide, as seen by Guattari, that is, destructive of the three ecologies of biodiversity, of society, and the individual psyche? The ecology of roads, including roadkill, has received some attention in transport geography studies. Coffin, for example, points out that in developed countries with transport networks, the nature of road systems as network structures renders vast areas of the landscape as road affected, with only small patches of isolated habitat remaining beyond the ecological influence of roads. Roadkill is, of course, just one negative eco-impact of roads, and while there is some benefit stemming from road networks, such as roadside biodiversity, they're also a source of damaging pollution, obviously, of waterways through runoff, as well as noise pollution, light pollution, and airborne pollution from exhaust emissions. And, oh, has that stopped? And where motorised vehicles are fuelled by the combustion of the fossilised remains of ancient marine animal life, as most are, they contribute to those anthropogenic climatic changes that are not only set to escalate an already high extinction rate, but are already bringing death and suffering to numberless animals, human and otherwise, through the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, such as the heat wave that killed an estimated 100,000 flying foxes in Australia in 2014. For animals who are doing it tough for other reasons, such as these flying foxes, the risk of getting squished constitutes one more threat to their species survival. In the UK, for example, 50% of our dwindling population of barn owls are killed on roads. In the US, a 2008 report to Congress found that 21 threatened or endangered species, including the Florida panther and the desert tortoise, are in jeopardy largely because of highway mortality. In the horizon of ecocide, then, roadkill acquires a new and dreadful salience. Turning to the second of Guattari's three ecologies, cars and roads clearly create spatially dispersed social relations, eroding place-based forms of employment, consumption and conviviality. There's a lot more that one could say about this, but I'll leave that aside. From our perspective, what's perhaps most salient about the daily spectacle of disregarded roadkill that they produce is the way in which motorised transport impedes the formation of more bio-inclusive social relations. This also has a psycho-spiritual effect, to the extent that we're becoming inured to animal death and suffering in a way that reinforces human exceptionalism and self-enclosure. One morning, early, as we round the corner from a rural laneway onto a busier two-way road, we are pulled up short by a deer. A trail of blood shows where the corpse has been dragged to the side of the road to lie alongside a hedged embankment. We do not try to heave it up and over. Too heavy, too bloody, too little time. The deer is entirely headless, the bone, muscle and sinews of the neck clearly visible to our horrified gaze. Ghastly though this seems, what is most striking is how the facelessness of this poor creature alters our affective response. On reflection, I realise that it is precisely in this that the decapitated deer discloses the bitter truth of roadkill. To the extent that their death and suffering is considered inconsequential, their everyday journeys and objectives disregarded, none of these animals has a face in the Levinasian sense. That is, in none do we encounter another who has an ethical call upon us. The psychic violence entailed in the suppression of fellow feeling for a non-human creature can also have horrendous implications for the treatment of fellow humans who have been relegated to the subordinate side of the animal-human binary, as Theodor Adorno observed in the wake of the Shoah. Slight lag here. The possibility of pogroms is decided in the moment when the gaze of a fatally wounded animal falls on a human being. The defiance with which he repels this gaze, after all, it's only an animal, reappears irresistibly in cruelties done to human beings. The perpetrators have again and again to reassure themselves that it is only an animal, because they could never fully believe this, even of animals. And yet, despite the continued, although possibly weakening, prevalence of human exceptionalism, many do care, and their stories too need to be told. Again in the lanes, this is an Owen section again, thank you Owen. Again in the lanes, driving alone, away from home. A bright summer's day, just at the top of a steep little dip down to where the road crosses a stream, I see a car is stopped, door open, and a woman running up the road in front of her car. I can just see past the stationary vehicle. She's running with her hands half to her head, obviously in distress. My windows are shut. I see her running forward, but hear nothing. It looks from behind as if she was crying. My God, I think someone, a child maybe, has been run over. But then she stops and bends and picks up a rabbit. Dead, limp in her hands, its head flops backwards, no doubt still as warm as it was alive a few seconds previously. I guessed a car preceding hers had run it over and sped on. Perhaps she witnessed the tumbling body. She carries the rabbit tenderly back to near her car, still with silent movements of distress. Then she lays it in the long grass on the verge. At that point, she notices me waiting behind. I recognise her as a fellow villager. She gives a sort of tearful, apologetic half smile and wave. Then she gets underway. I was moved and in a sense heartened by her grief and tender placing of the rabbit in the grass. We see each other at the occasional village function, but never touch upon this incident. She might not even realise it was me in the other car. Well, this reminded Owen of a passage from Barry Lopez's beautiful essay, Apologia, where he describes doing a similar thing for a whole series of animals that he encounters on the one journey. And he goes on to say, I carry each one away from the pavement into a cover of grass or brush, out of decency, I think, and worry. Who are these animals? Their lights gone out. What journeys have fallen apart here? Commenting on this, John Burnside writes, to handle another animal in this way is to reassert one's own usually concealed bond with the creaturely. Because such handling demands tact and real tenderness, it becomes a highly charged event, an assumption of responsibility, and a declaration not of guilt, which is something else, but of penitence. But what's striking to me about Owen's description of his encounter with the woman and the dead rabbit is that her tender concern was evidently a source of embarrassment, and so it was a quasi-covert act which just reinforces the sense that somehow these dead animals are ungrievable, that it's inappropriate to grieve for a road-killed animal, which is our point. That's part of the problem. There are, of course, several ways in which the incidence of roadkill can be mitigated. There are rare occasions when it might be possible to actually rescue an animal before it's hit. I have here this really beautiful poem by Charles Olson called West Gloucestershire, also kind of not far from the neck of the woods where Owen and I are living. And I gave it, I hope, all the marshes of Walker's Creek to get it off what might also seem what was wrong with it, that the highway had magnetised the poor thing, the loveliest animal I believe I ever did see, in such a quandary, and off the marshes of Walker's Creek fall graduatedly so softly to the creek, and the creek to Ipswich Bay, an arm of the Atlantic Ocean, send the star-nosed mole all into the grass, all away from the dizzying highway, if that was what was wrong with the little thing spinning in the middle of the highway. However, of course, that can be dangerous, and Owen also has a story where he slowed down so as not to hit a hedgehog, and somebody overtook him and ran over the hedgehog. So best intentions can go awry. But of course, people can opt to drive more slowly, especially at night. And appropriate signage can encourage this behaviour. Culverts, underpasses and overpasses in combination with appropriate fencing can be designed to enable animals to more safely negotiate human roadways, as proposed by advocates of the permeable highways since the 1970s. And Kroll is very interesting on this, because earlier roadkill mitigation strategies were really premised on a kind of nature-cultural dualism, where you tried to make the highway even more kind of sealed off from the countryside around, whereas this is a more kind of a natural cultural approach, if you like, a recognition of human non-human entanglement in shared space, and providing animals the possibility to negotiate an anthropogenic environment rather than trying to keep them off it. Very interesting shift. Communities of carers can be constituted to look after injured animals, and as in the case of Australia, the young of female marsupials. There's a whole bevy of people who look after the babies who've been taken from the pouch of female marsupials who've been killed on the road, such as Rigby, the Australian eco-philosopher Plumwood's very famous and photogenic survivor of a roadkill incident. Yet, and this is really our key point, the precondition for the normalisation of such mitigation strategies, conceived as part of a wider movement to reduce all adverse human impacts on our Earth others, would be a fundamental cultural shift that would, as Plumwood puts it, resituate non-humans in ethical terms as a necessary counterpart to resituating humans ecologically. With respect to roadkill, this might begin with cultivating practices of honouring the dead. So disregarding roadkill reinforces human exceptionalism, but respectful encounters with roadkill can also be a vehicle for overcoming human exceptionalism. And this is another Owen section. There's a memorial in Bath to those killed on the roads in the southwest. There's no indication who erected it. The emblem on the plaque is an abstract representation of a dove drawn out of the curl of a road. It has road markings as part of the design. To us, it looks like a dove that has been run over. Yet that is clearly not the point. For its meaning, it's purely symbolic. So instead of appropriating the image of the animal for the purpose of exclusively human remembrance, veiling the other than human lives lost and broken on the roads, we propose multi-species modes of memorialisation, in which the quest for road peace is extended to all creatures. Such memorials could be considered acts of penitential witness, and might be accompanied by public forms of the private rituals that are possibly more common than we know. But they might also take the form of confronting artworks, such as John Reed's startling performance for 25 passing vehicles, in which the artist posed naked at the opposite end of a road sign from a dead roo on the Newell Highway. People who know this neck of the woods in Australia will know that Dubbo is a more kind of working class destination, whereas Parkes is a more middle class destination, so kind of echoing kind of the species hierarchies and social hierarchies there. It's called 25 passing vehicles because as he lay there, no fewer than 25 vehicles, most of them trucks, sailed right on by without so much as varying their speed. A testament, Reed speculates, to the ease at which we can differentiate between art and life, or else the drivers were very inattentive or just freaked out by this naked man on the road. And yet the photographic record remains as a powerful statement of solidarity with the animal dead. Yet, it's also important to avoid perpetuating a colonising gesture by construing animals purely as victims of motorised transportation. Roads provide affordances of various kinds for some animals. We often see birds standing and pecking about in the laneways where we live. We think they might be gathering grit for their gizzards, or at least Owen does, and he knows more about this than me. On occasion in the laneways, one can be lucky enough to end up driving behind a hunting sparrowhawk. This is a real thrill. They fly low and fast, just above the tarmac, and then, expressing a stunning hunting technique, they suddenly flip over the hedge or through a gateway or an opening to surprise a blackbird or some other smaller bird type that makes up their preferred prey. Road verges, as I've already mentioned, also afford food for grazing animals, although not much in this case. This is obviously a rather drought-stricken little corner of Australia. These roos are having a bit of a difficult time, I'd say. Of course, they can also provide food for scavengers consuming the roadkill, and for this reason it's doubly important to drag corpses off the road, not only as a mark of respect for the dead, but also so that scavengers don't get hit in turn. Driving to Val Plumwood's house of an evening was often slow going because she'd be stopping all the time to pull the critters off the road, as indeed we should all do if we can safely. And actually, Libby alerted me to a blog by Jonathan Clark on precisely this question. Clark observes in that blog, a wider ecological vision enables us to appreciate that a carcass is also a source of life. Another way in which we might affirm our shared creatureliness with scavengers is to participate in the respectful consumption of road-killed animals. And I've left out the exciting narrative of Owen's butchering, cooking and consumption of a road-killed pigeon, but of course there are some ethical meat-eaters who will only eat roadkill. And of course, roads might also afford opportunities for risky, amorous encounters. And in this respect, human exceptionalism decrees that the animal's having better. You try that and you'll get arrested, right? They get off scot-free. Best to do it in your car. Okay. Well, in conclusion, while our emphasis throughout this paper has been on human responsibility and animal grievability in the matter of roadkill, it's only by affirming animals' independent agency, the particularities of their lifeways and their geographies, that we might move towards creating more life-sustaining modes of multi-species mobility across shared spaces that are inextricably natural cultural. Thank you.